Women don't decide if a man is high value after a long conversation. They feel it within minutes, sometimes seconds, and what they're responding to has nothing to do with how you look, how much you earn, or what you say. It's something underneath all of that, something most men have never been taught to build, because nobody told them it was the thing that actually mattered. That's what this video is about. This isn't about performing confidence or following a script. This is for men who want to be the kind of man women genuinely respect. Not just find attractive for a moment, but trust, value, and want to keep in their lives. If that's what you're building toward, stay with me. Picture this. You're in a group. Someone makes a comment that lands wrong. Not offensive exactly, but off. Everyone else laughs or stays quiet. You laugh too, even though it didn't sit right with you. Nobody called you out. Nobody even noticed. But she did. High-value men have an internal compass that doesn't bend to social pressure. Not because they're contrarian, not because they're trying to make a point, but because they know what they think, and they don't quietly abandon it to keep the temperature comfortable. Women feel this almost immediately. It shows up in whether you change your opinion because someone pushed back hard, or because they made a genuinely good argument. In whether you can say, "I don't see it that way," without turning it into a fight, and without backing down to avoid one. This is conviction, not stubbornness, not aggression, the quiet certainty of a man who knows his own mind. When conviction is absent, what she feels is a kind of formlessness. She can't find the edges of you. And without edges, there's no real person to connect with. To develop it, start noticing the moments where you agree with something you don't actually agree with. Not to start saying no to everything, but to get honest about when you're genuinely aligned versus when you're just managing the room. The man who knows the difference carries himself differently. Women feel that difference. The second trait is one that almost every man in his 30s gets wrong. Not because he lacks it, but because somewhere along the way he was taught that having it made him less of a man. Most men recognize this one the moment it's named. Imagine you've been seeing someone for a few weeks. Things are going well. Then she goes quiet for a day, maybe two. You check your phone, you reread the last few messages. You start to wonder what you did. That spiral, the anxiety, the overanalysis, the reaching for reassurance, is something she can feel even if you never say a word of it out loud. It comes through in the slightly too quick reply, the energy that has shifted from settled to searching. What she's registering is emotional instability, and it doesn't make her feel wanted. It makes her feel like she's responsible for your state. High-value men are emotionally regulated. That doesn't mean they don't feel things. It means their internal state doesn't collapse every time something is uncertain. They can sit in ambiguity without grasping. They have an inner life that is genuinely their own, not dependent on constant validation from the woman they're interested in. This got confused for a long time with emotional shutdown. They're not the same thing. One is a man who doesn't feel. The other is a man who feels fully and doesn't immediately outsource those feelings to the person closest to him. To develop this, pay attention to your nervous system in the early stages of dating specifically. When uncertainty shows up, build the habit of pausing before you respond. Not playing games. Giving yourself the space to come back to yourself before you act from anxiety. That pause is where emotional regulation lives. There's a video on this channel that goes much deeper on this, specifically on how emotional regulation shows up when interest feels uncertain and the stakes feel high. I'll link it at the end. Trait 3 is the one women describe as the thing that makes a man feel safe. Not safe in a soft way, but safe in the way that makes her want to actually open up. Let's say she's telling you about something that went wrong at work. It's not a crisis, but it bothered her, and she's sharing it with you. You listen for 30 seconds, and then you tell her exactly what she should have done. The advice is probably right, but the conversation closes. What she needed wasn't a solution. She needed to feel heard first. High-value men understand the difference between fixing a problem and holding space for someone to process one. and they can move between those two modes depending on what the situation actually calls for. This is attentiveness, not performing interest, not asking follow-up questions because you read somewhere that's what you should do, actually being present in a way that makes another person feel genuinely seen. Masculine culture trained most men to lead with solutions. That's not a character flaw. But in close relationships, it creates distance. When she shares something personal and gets a fix instead of a feeling of being understood, she stops sharing the personal things. Here's what it looks like when it's working. You ask a question and you actually sit with the answer before you respond. You don't perform listening while waiting for your turn to talk. You're actually there. Emotional safety is the soil where intimacy grows, and attentiveness is how you cultivate it. Not once, not as a technique, but as a way of being with another person. Practice this in your next conversation with anyone. Stay one beat longer before you respond. Let what they said actually land. That one beat changes the entire quality of the exchange. The fourth trait is the one that separates men who attract real commitment from men who attract something casual and confused. And the reason it trips men up is surprising. Sometimes you just know she's interested in you. You can feel it. And because you don't want to scare her off, you start making yourself smaller. You go along with what she suggests. You pull back your own opinion. You try to stay comfortable for her. And slowly, without either of you quite understanding why, the attraction drains out of the dynamic. She wasn't looking for someone who would orbit her. She was looking for someone who had his own direction and who wanted her to be part of it, not the whole of it. High-value men have a life, a real one. Work they find meaningful, friendships they invest in, interests that aren't negotiable. Not because they're unavailable, but because a man with a clear sense of purpose is fundamentally more compelling than a man who has made another person the center of his universe before she's earned that place. This is self-possession, the quality of belonging, first and most completely, to yourself. It starts as accommodation and gradually becomes erasure, and the woman on the other end doesn't feel flattered. She feels the weight of being someone's everything, and that weight is not attractive, no matter how much she cares about him. Build a life you don't want to step away from, not to impress anyone, because a man who is genuinely invested in his own existence brings something to a relationship that can't be faked. She walks into your world, and your world is worth walking into. The fifth trait is the most misunderstood, because it gets confused with something much harder and much colder. When I explain what it actually is, I think you'll recognize it immediately. So you're 3 months in. Something isn't sitting right. Maybe she said something that crossed a line. Maybe there's a pattern you've been noticing but haven't named. You've been telling yourself it's not a big deal. You don't want to make things awkward, so you say nothing. And the thing that wasn't a big deal quietly becomes the thing that erodes the whole connection. Most men have been taught that bringing something up signals insecurity, that the masculine move is to let things go. But what tends to happen when a man never holds the line on anything is this. He ends up with a relationship that works on her terms only, and a version of himself he doesn't recognize. High-value men set boundaries, not as a power play, not as a test, but because they know what works for them and what doesn't, and they trust the relationship enough to say so. This is directness, the willingness to name what's happening, clearly and calmly, without aggression and without avoidance. And here's the part nobody tells you. A woman's respect for a man increases significantly when he can raise something that bothers him without it turning into a fight, and without him backing down because the conversation got uncomfortable. That combination, directness delivered with composure, tells her this man knows himself, and that she can trust what he says because he won't say something he doesn't mean and won't stay silent about something he does. Start with something small. Identify one thing in your daily life where you've been staying quiet when you should speak. Not to create conflict, to practice saying what's true for you and staying steady while you do it. That muscle builds. And as it builds, the quality of every relationship you have changes. 5 traits, all of them buildable, none of them performances, conviction, emotional regulation, attentiveness, self-possession, directness. These aren't a checklist to get through. They're a direction to move in. And the man who starts moving in that direction, even slowly, becomes someone genuinely different. Not because he changed what he does on dates, because he changed who he is when he walks through the door. That version of you is already there. This is just the work of reaching him. If what we covered here resonated, the next video is a direct continuation. It goes into how these 5 traits show up specifically in the early stages of dating, the phase where most men lose ground without understanding why. It will make everything in this video more concrete and more immediately usable. It's on screen now. I'll see you there.